Welcome to HeartTube. My name is John Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below. That's where we pick the questions from each week. Wrote down quite a few this week, and I appreciate all of your participation in this, because without you, there's not a subscriber garden question and answer video. We try to pick ones that are fairly relevant to whatever's going on, or if we put up a video during the week and it got a ton of questions that I failed to say something in the video or whatever, I'll address that as well. Okay, so a few things. One is there's a big announcement toward the end of the video about us having an open house here in the garden. So I'll talk about that at the very end of the video. The $30 discount on the weekly garden planner ended April 30th, and thank you guys so much for who purchased the weekly garden planner last month. We're adding to it every week, shooting material every week for that, so it will just continue to fill out over the course of the year. There's going to be an ongoing $20 discount down in the description of the video, so if you're still interested in it, I put a discount there just for folks who are subscribed to the channel can get some sort of discount off of it that people going to the website wouldn't know about necessarily, versus you guys who watch the videos. So thank you very much for that. The Learn to Garden video series, though, this is the May sale, is going to be $60 off, just like it was back in December. And the Learn to Garden video series got a transplanting video this week. I transplanted this large podocarpus from one side to the other, and sent out an email to folks for that. There's another video coming on the Learn to Garden video series this week on tools. And then Steph, who is back here planting some annuals, maybe you can see her back here, she is doing 2 videos during the month on design. So the Learn to Garden video series is going to get some design videos this month as well. So transplanting, tools, and 2 design videos during the month of May, and there's a $60 discount, and the code is LEARN. You can just use the code LEARN. I linked that down below the video as well. What else do we have? We put up a few. The videos from this week are transplanting, planting, adding annuals, adding color. We're about finished with the vast majority of the planting, mulching, bringing the garden, all these new spaces that we gained from the house construction, all that kind of stuff. Most of all of that's complete. And this Monday, I'm getting started on this patio that I'm standing on right here. So we're on to hardscaping during the month of May. It's supposed to be in the 90s this week, so I probably should have reversed these 2 things a bit. Anyway, we're doing that this week. And again, the big announcement will be at the end of the video. So let's jump into some questions from this past week. The first question was about Learn to Garden. Somebody asked can we do a video on propagation for the Learn to Garden video series? Yes, there's going to be propagation videos there as well. That Learn to Garden video series and the weekly garden planner, once you buy them, you own them permanently, and we're going to continue to add content to them, so you don't have to pay again in the future for that. But yeah, it will contain propagation as well. So somebody asked if the witch's broom on knockout roses is the same as other witch's brooms on other plants. Yeah, it's similar, but it's disease-based on those roses. So there's an aerified mite that basically floats through the air and lands on its next rose victim. It's not a victim. The mite's not doing anything wrong. The mite's doing what mites do. It just unfortunately carries the rosette disease with it as it goes. So it's just going from one plant to the next. It's not trying to spread a disease. It just happens to pick up the disease in one rose and then floats through the air and lands on another rose. And the way rosette moved so fast was that knockout roses were just so popular. Right? I mean, there's a reason they were so popular. They're blooming so beautifully this year, the ones that haven't gotten rosette. I mean, there's a reason so many were sold. But in the Raleigh area here, we've seen over the last 5 years or so many of them with rosette. Again, the ones without rosette, the plants look fantastic. They're full bloom right now, just as red can be on the red ones. Of course, there's pink ones and yellow ones too, but they look absolutely fantastic. But that witch's broom that you're seeing in that growth on it is related to the disease, the rosette disease. Whereas, I would imagine that some witches, brooms, and conifers and things could be related to disease, but it's just some strange growth that comes on the plant that frequently, sometimes you can cut off and successfully root, and it's basically a version of the parent plant. Now, it is a clone, technically, of the plant that you took that broom off of, that strange growth that occurred on it, so they can revert back. So some of these dwarf, if we have some of these strange dwarf Cryptomeria we have in the garden, at any given moment, you can get just the most vigorous growth you've ever seen on it that can start growing, just like a regular Cryptomeria japonica. So you have to watch out for those things on those named varieties of dwarf conifers, that were started off as brooms on larger plants, which were just interesting mutant-like growth on the plant. But on the knockouts, it's definitely, it's rosette causing it, which is the beginning of a death cycle. There's no way to stop it. Basically, what we see on the knockout roses is they'll have they'll have a couple brooms on them the first year, just really strange red growth. Now, they do have red growth when they're coming out, so don't think all red growth is like this, but you'll know it. It's very strange looking growth that happens on them, and you'll get 1 or 2 little brooms, 3 maybe, the first year. The second year it'll just be covered in them, and then the third year they just die. That entire time they were left in the ground, they were spreading, potentially mites were spreading that disease to healthy knockout roses. So if you see it, get rid of them quicker. That way you may not be able to enjoy them in your own garden, but somebody, you'll be able to enjoy them out and about like we are this year. I think so many have been taken out in and around our neighborhood. The remaining ones seem like they're in pretty good shape right now. There were a few questions about better boxwood this week because I've been showing off the 4 better boxwoods that we have in the garden. There was some question about comparing them to other boxwoods. These are better boxwood are hybrid. They're hybrid boxwoods. They've been crossed with several species together to try to find boxwood that would resist boxwood blight. So this is breeding from Belgium. In Europe, they had blight a long time before we did. So it was showing up in some of the big gardens in Europe and in France, all over Europe early on. So they just got a head start on it. So the better boxwood breeding was from Belgium, and basically hybridizing boxwoods and then putting them out in a field and exposing them to boxwood blight intentionally until they found ones that would absolutely resist it over and over and over and over again. And the 4 that I have here in the garden are the first 4 that have been released from that breeding. There's others coming as well, but they're 4 basically very distinct different shapes that they'll grow in without pruning on them. But of course they can all be pruned into whatever shape you want to keep them in. But this is, again, there'll be more than 4 eventually. I think that, when I've, seen them on the shelf, they've been priced pretty well for new patented plants. The price point seems to be pretty good, and they're pretty vigorous growing here in the garden. I've noticed, I like them a lot, and hopefully that takes care of one of the problems, that boxwoods get. This next one was an absolutely fantastic question, okay? So somebody said, can you point out some gardening concepts that are unrelated to the zone you live in? Basically, somebody who watches the channel said their mom is in California, didn't think there's anything that she could get from, watching someone in Raleigh, North Carolina's gardening channel. That was just her initial thoughts on it. But, as I show off a lot of plants on this channel, and everybody knows how much I love plants, right? I love collecting plants, and this garden, I have no idea the hundreds of varieties of plants that are in this small garden at this point, and we're starting another garden project, that's much bigger than this, that will do the same thing in. So how much I love plants, but at the end of the day, this channel is not about plants. Okay, this channel is about improving soil so that your plants can take care of themselves. And that's what this channel's always been about. So I don't care whether you're living in the country, you may not be able to grow a particular plant. Loropetalum, there's all kinds of Loropetalum envy, right? And folks in zones 4, 5, and 6 are zones 3 to 6 who are watching the channel. But it's not about that lower petalum, it's about what we did to the soil underneath that lower petalum that has allowed it to thrive like that. And that doesn't change anywhere, anywhere you live. If you know, it's more about soil. I've given a couple talks in the last couple of weeks, and you know, I was pointing out in those talks that when I initially started the channel, it was about making videos about individual plants, and I was just doing that for garden center customers of mine. I was just showing, you know, hey, I've got a video for that you can watch if you're interested in it, because people are so nervous buying plants that they're asking so many questions, and you're like, you know, I can't answer 100 questions for every 3 plants I sell. This is not good math. So I would, you know, I started making videos just to help people who were buying plants from me. And then when I realized it would become a thing, you know, I kind of said in the back of my mind, I am going to slowly but surely move people toward this form of soil first. I'm going to call it soil first gardening. Not worrying about all the things that are happening up above so much, and start worrying more about the ground and taking care of all the things you can't see. If you take care of all the things you can't see that are under the mulch and under the, you know, the layers of things that we've added on the ground, if you take care of those things first, those things are the things that will take care of the plants. And if you pick appropriate plants to your area, sunshade, wet, dry, hot, cold, whatever, the rest will take care of itself. And so this channel, as many plants as I show off, and I show off a lot of them you can't necessarily grow in the area that you're growing them in, this channel has nothing to do with those plants. Pick appropriate plants for your area, but start with the soil first, and the rest, your success will be built on that. I'm thinking about doing a video. We had aphids on our spirea in the front garden, and now they're gone. Like 3 days passed and they're gone. I'm thinking about doing a video called all the things we were doing while our spirea had aphids. And it was literally drinking coffee and waiting for a bird or some other ladybug or some other creature to come along and take care of them. I just don't care about any of those things. You know, lots and lots of the questions, you know, that I get are, how do I take care of this? How do I take care of that? And the answer is always going to be, for me, put effort into the soil first, and then make sure you're picking appropriate plants for the spaces that you're putting them in. And the rest is, you know, the rest is pretty straightforward. So that's what your mother in California would get out of this channel. Hopefully would be that this isn't about plants, okay? It is about plants. At the end of the day, this is what we're trying to do, right? But it's built on something. It's built on a foundation for success. Okay, that's what I would say. All right. So somebody is in Houston, Zone 9A, wants to raise up an existing garden bed. Will rose soil mix be okay? Blend of compost, fines, and pine bark. Yeah. So I would raise it with compost and pine bark fines, if you can get them there. That would be totally fine to raise the bed if you had to. I would not go with the topsoil, and I've talked about this a bunch of times about ordering topsoil from various places, because frequently it's, you know, scraped off of some place. You don't know where it came from. You don't know if you're inheriting a herbicide that lasts a long time or anything like that. So, or, you know, a lot of times the topsoil is run through a machine where they'll fluff it. And they'll get the rocks out of it, and they'll fluff it up. And when it arrives on your driveway, it seems like, ooh, really fluffy soil, and then it's rock hard. The first time it gets wet, it becomes just literally rock hard, and it becomes an encrusted dome sitting in your driveway that's quite hard to move. So I would avoid that if you can, and yeah, raise it with pine bark and compost. Should be fine. I don't know how deep you're talking about going, so. You know, sometimes it's hard to answer some of these questions, but yes, I would raise it with, and all of my beds are slowly but surely being raised from 2 things. Number one, the organic material that's going down is obviously raising the soil some, but the other thing that's happening is the compaction that was here all this time is going away, because I've got earthworms and all kinds of creatures down here, you know, fluffing the soil up too. Okay, so somebody said how to best design a bed with perennials and vegetables. So I don't think, I've said this several times, I don't think there's any difference between growing vegetables and growing any other annual flowers that you would have in your landscape. I will say there might be a difference in growing some of our native perennials, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But there's no reason, if you don't have rabbit issues or whatever, that you can't integrate your perennials right into your beds. Eggplant's beautiful. It's a beautiful plant. Okra has unbelievable flowers. It's in that hibiscus family, the mallows, and it has these big, beautiful flowers on them that pollinators absolutely love. Of course, some of our larger leafed vegetables like zucchini and squash, they're beautiful plants with big, beautiful yellow flowers. Really no reason not to have them out here other than for me. That's the only sunny spot I've got, and the rabbits, cause me issues as well. So I have a rabbit fence around my vegetable garden. But I don't think there's any difference in how I prep any annual bed. And when I say annuals, I mean things that I'm turning over on a twice a year basis or once a year basis. So, I've got borders around things where we flip out annual flowers, and then my vegetable garden, I'm flipping out between cool season vegetables and warm season vegetables, and I'm adding compost to those each time. Okay, my other beds out here, at this point, I'm just mulching. I initially composted them, and of course you can compost them different ways. You can put down actual compost, or you can put down wood chips and let that break down. Whatever it is, however you're creating that compost or humus layer on top of the soil, doesn't matter. But I don't do that anymore in those beds. It's just the annual beds. And so if I was planting tomatoes out in my beds out here, I would probably prep that little space where I'm planting it with a little bit of compost as I'm putting it in the ground. But there's absolutely no reason why I couldn't have a cucumber climbing on a tree or any sort of other interesting things that you wanted to do and mix the two together. There's just not a lot of difference. I've got a video on my list that I've thought about making for the last 2 or 3 years, and I just haven't yet, just saying there's no difference between growing vegetables and flowers. There's just not. It's the same thing. They're flowering plants, and they thrive in the same sorts of spaces. As long as they're getting sun, water, and organic material, and the nutrients that are down in the soil, they're all the same. Number 7, how does the zone change affect the plants in our landscapes and future plant choices? I just wouldn't make any real changes in what you're growing in your garden spaces based on that new updated zone map. Unfortunately, about half the country changed zones, and I did a video with Tony Avon. If you haven't watched that video, I think it's a really good video on talking about the flaws with the zone map. It's a great place to start. Okay, so I'm now in zone 8A. We were 7B, 8A. I mean, literally, I was on the line. Probably in the city, I was in 8A. But if you looked at where the line was on the map, it was a little south and east of Raleigh, where zone 8 started. But again, right here inside the city, it's probably 3 to 4 degrees warmer every night than it is outside the city. So I was probably in 8A already, but now I'm firmly in the middle of zone 8A. But what's not on the horticultural zone map is the actual low temperature you got in the 30 years of data that make up that map. So it's 2 15-year data sets put together. So it's 30 years of your average low temperature. That's what that map is, okay? It basically says, in the last 30 years, my average low temperature here in Raleigh, North Carolina was 15 degrees, or whatever it was in your area, 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever, but it doesn't say, oh yeah, by the way, we got a 0 degree night during that time. We got a -2 degree night during that time. The average came up because it is warming. So we know, especially nighttime temperatures have warmed substantially, and that's what that map is. It's nighttime low temperatures. They've come up substantially in this 30-year data set. But the problem is, if you're still getting that one temperature that will kill those plants. And so that's the flaw in the map. The map should include what the actual low temperature was during the data set. And then people who are risk averse could then plant plants based on that number. Okay, that would be helpful to people who are risk averse. Those of us like me, I'm not risk averse. I like pushing the boundaries of the plants. I would just go by I live in zone 8A. But if I saw 0 degrees or -2 during that last 30 years, and that was on the map for me to see, I could say I only want plants that would have survived that if I was risk averse. So I think that would be more helpful to gardeners to know what the actual low temperature was, not the average low temperature for that span. So I'm not changing anything. If you're risk averse, worried about losing plants, spending money that's just going to die or whatever, I would stick with the zone you were in before the zone map was updated. If you're, if you don't mind taking on a little bit of risk, and maybe look up, I mean, it's probably fairly easy to research what was the actual low temperature that happened in your area in the last few decades. That may be helpful to know. Okay, let's see. Lots of questions about crepe myrtle bark scale coming. Bark scale is just really just come out of nowhere, and it's just really virtually every crepe myrtle in my neighborhood has bark scale on it. And they were asking about treatments without toxins. So I think in the late winter, early spring, some sort of dormant oil is going to be sprayed on the trunks of these plants. I mean, this is not the first time I've seen something come out of nowhere and just attack something, and our initial response is lots of chemicals. So there's going to be lots of people who are going to be pouring systemic insecticides at the base of their crepe myrtles to keep anything from chewing on the leaves during the growing season. So I know that's the initial reaction that people are going to use. The kind of non-toxic way to do it, I guess, would be to spray dormant oil. Of course, it'll kill anything else that's on it as well. So if there's other life on the tree, the dormant oil will kill that as well. But late winter, early spring, when the scale is active, is the time that you can spray dormant oil on them. There is no cure for this, and what I think is going to happen is some percentage of crepe myrtles are going to die. I know that J.C. Ralston Arboretum, this came up in a discussion. I was on a panel over there last Saturday, and Mark said that they're taking out some of the crepe myrtles and the garden that they don't necessarily care as much about, so that the ones that they really, really do are not hopefully impacted. What we need is some space between crepe myrtles. That's what we need. It's just like we needed space between those roses. The same thing in that other question. If you connect the dots on plants that potentially have a problem, and every single gardener has to have this plant, when something happens to it, it just spreads really like fire through there. And then like Photinia did back in the 80s and early 90s, all the red tip Photinia just basically died. But there are a few red tip Photinia still remaining out in landscapes. Those were just, it couldn't spread once 99% of them were dead, right? So that's what's going to happen with crepe myrtles. I think we're just going to see less of them, and the ones that are left should be less effective because the thing can't just, right now, I mean, there's virtually not a garden or in this neighborhood that doesn't have a crepe myrtle. I've got one in a container right there, and it's not been affected yet. It's a tiny thing, but anyway, I guess non-toxic thing to do would be to spray dormant oil on it, but I don't, we'll see how. I mean, it's killing some of them here in the garden in my neighborhood. Easy for me to say. So somebody said, discuss azaleas and camellias in terms of watering and fertilizing. Well, I fertilize the same no matter what. So we're fertilizing once a year, late winter, early spring with an organic fertilizer, and then we're keeping the ground covered, with mulch. And that's my entire fertilization. Camellias and azaleas are acid-loving plants. So they like a lower pH. So your pH is the most important thing from your soil test. And I've got an old video on the channel from when it was at my shot in my garden center lobby on why soil pH is so important. So as long as your pH is below, let's say 6, then your azaleas and camellias should thrive in your garden as long as you're keeping them mulched, and as long as you can fertilize them or not fertilize them once a year, and you should be absolutely fine. In terms of watering, they're shallow-rooted plants, both. Especially the azaleas. The azaleas are really shallow-rooted. The roots are right up in the top. But well-established old azaleas and old camellias just don't need anything from us. I mean, some of the best camellias I've ever seen are on old farmhouses where there's nobody maintaining them, nobody watering them, nobody doing anything. Same thing with azaleas. giant azaleas all over this neighborhood. Nobody's watering them. But that first year or two they're in the ground, you know, you got to get them established. But once those are established, if you're in an area that gets normal rainfall like we do, where you won't probably go more than 30 days or 40 days without rain, then nothing to do. There's nothing specific about azaleas and camellias versus any other plant, except for they do like more acidic soil, lower pH soils. And when the pH is lower, iron is readily available and they're heavy iron feeders. And so that's the difference between plants that like acid soils like blueberries, you know, like a pH of 4.5, because that's where the peak available iron is. Okay. All right, but go back and watch that video and I think it would be helpful. But there is no, if you ask me about how to take care of an individual plant in terms of fertilizing and that kind of thing, I just say, take care of the soil and let the soil take care of the plants. And don't differentiate them. There's not a whole lot of differentiation as long as you're putting the plant in the right place. Camellias like part shade typically, azaleas like part shade, except for some of the newer breeding and the repeat flowering azaleas like encores, like a little more sun. Okay, what nitrogen do you add to mulch and when? So I talked about when I put down, somebody had put down wood chips and like 2 years later they hadn't broken down at all. And I've used big giant wood material to cover those beds up and down in Wallace. And I only have until February to get that stuff hopefully breaking down some. I'm gonna have to pull some bigger material out of there at some point, but I'd like to get at least it breaking down some of the smaller material breaking down. So you can just add urea nitrogen to it. You can, you know, there's like, you can order urea nitrogen on Amazon probably, or you know, a farm store, just something like 4600 or something like that. And you can just throw it out by hand. Don't throw this over your plants. I'm not talking about throwing pure nitrogen over top of your plants and forcing all that growth. I'm talking about if you just started an area with wood chips and you're trying to get them to break down a little quicker, it does need a little nitrogen to break down. So you can just use urea nitrogen and throw it out over the top of it. This is not an ongoing thing, not something I'm recommending for anyone's actual gardens. This is just about getting wood, giving something that the wood needs to help it break down without, sometimes there's no nitrogen necessarily available in the soil that it can use to get this process started. And you need to hit it over the head. So when I did organic lawn care and organic landscaping, the job I had after I worked at a garden center when I was a kid, that's what we would do on some gardens. What I did here was I put down the wood chips and let them give them 6 months or so to get this engine going. But when we were landscaping and we're trying to get something just going immediately, sometimes we would throw down some nitrogen on a new space that we were creating just to get that engine firing, right? Just get it going. That was a technique we would use. And once you wake it up, we would till it the first time. We don't do any ongoing tilling, but initially you'd till this down in the ground and then cover it in organic material. And then immediately you could just get this thing firing, get everything back alive in the soil again, invite all the worms and the, you know, everything that lives in the soil back into it. And anyway, that's the way we would do it. Just hit it over the head once with a little bit of nitrogen and then don't do it again. So what's our biggest gardening mistake and how we solved it? I don't know that, I mean, there's little minor things that we change here or there. I put up a video the other day talking about, I put in an 8-foot path and made a whole video about it. But the video was more about you can make changes along the way. Not everything is set in stone. Not everything you plant it needs to stay where you planted it. Things can move around, doesn't matter. You're not gonna get everything correct. And right out of the gate. And some plants are going to grow faster than you think or bigger than you think, and all kinds of things happen. You can make changes. But gardening mistake wise, at the old house, I would say I made one mistake, which I put in too many large growing trees. And so my garden became, over a 20-year period, you don't see the trees growing really, okay? Because they grow a little bit at a time every year, and then you look back 20 years later and your whole garden is completely shaded. And that happened. Even my vegetable garden, I shaded it out at the old house. So that was one mistake that I made. I love trees, but you have to think about, as you're placing them, how that shade is going to help or hinder in the future. On the west side of your house, it could help save you a lot of electricity on your electric bill, keeping your house cooler in the afternoon, you know, from that sun slamming the side of it. And then the leaves, if it's deciduous, the leaves would drop off of it in the winter, and maybe that sun would help warm the house during the winter time. So that shade could be beneficial, right? But it could also, you could plant the wrong tree next to your vegetable garden and not be able to grow vegetables. So think through that one a lot as you're adding trees into the garden. Definitely not discouraging trees, just make sure that the placement, you know, what's this going to look like in 20 years when this tree has actually got some size on it? How's that going to impact me being able to garden going forward? Number 12, I just wrote down consultations. Thank you guys, and I've gotten a lot of emails here in the last few days as well. I blocked out consultations till later in the year. I've gotten so many, and I've got a lot coming up that are already scheduled. But thank you guys very much who sign up for them. But I've gotten so many this spring that I had to actually start to block them out a little bit, just because there was overwhelming demand, which again, I really, really, really appreciate. But I would, you know, I didn't have enough time to get a lot of the other things done that I was trying to do. So I have a lot of consultations already scheduled on the books, and then I blocked out the rest of the time through spring and summer because, again, just a lot of holes got filled. And basically, if I leave anything open, you guys will fill it in, and I appreciate that. I mean, it's really, it's very humbling how the comments that you guys leave on videos, I mean, are, you know, the comments you guys, how nice this audience is, and you know, and signing up for consultations and buying the Learn to Garden video series and the weekly garden planner and ordering all the t-shirts you guys have ordered over the last couple of weeks. It doesn't go unrecognized on my part how great of an audience that I actually have on here. But I have so many consultations, I can't get the other things done that I need to be doing. So I've just kind of, it'll be later in the year before there's any availability on consultations. Somebody's got a dwarf Cryptomeria. Weird, I talked about Cryptomeria earlier. On a wall, and it's getting all day sun. Is that okay? Most Cryptomeria will take full sun without any problem. Sometimes though, a wall can actually add heat overnight that can have some negative impact on plants. So you'll just have to monitor it. I think it'll likely be fine. Cryptomeria are pretty tough plants overall, except that freeze killed so many in zone 6. It's kind of weird over on the Tennessee side of the mountains. The Cryptomeria hadn't gone to sleep, and then they got 0-degree temperatures on them, and it actually killed them, which was just kind of crazy. But again, sometimes our foundations can hold heat overnight and can have negative impacts on our plants, but Cryptomeria is probably fine. Somebody has lavender, phenomenal lavender in 8B, North Carolina beach area. Eastern exposure with sandy soils, added rich organic material, and they don't thrive. Should they add more sand back in? I don't have any idea. Phenomenal is one of the better lavenders for us in the South to use, but I don't know if it's being, you know, it's a funny thing. Lavender doesn't necessarily like our humidity, you know, in the Southeast, and so, you know, there's a lot of breeding around, you know, around that. You know, I see these other people making videos and, you know, cutting their lavender back with weed eaters and things like that in more Mediterranean climates, you know, and then here in the Southeast, we're like, please live, because the amount of rain and humidity that we get can be problematic on a lot of different lavenders. But Phenomenal is one of the better ones. Sometimes when I read these questions and I see, you know, they've added rich organic material, make sure you're not loving the thing to death. It is a Mediterranean plant, so it comes from an area with, you know, low seasonal rainfall and well-drained sandy soils in all likelihood. So you might be overdoing the rich organic material. Of course, I don't know. I'm just reading, you know, I'm reading between the lines in a question. There are times where there are more plants loved to death than anything else. That was always been my experience. I've sold, you know, hundreds of thousands of plants over the years, and the ones that typically died, it was always, I watered it every day, I don't know what happened. Or, you know, I put in a bag of, you know, a whole bag of rich black, you know, soil or whatever it was. And I think a lot of times that is the actual issue. They're being loved to death. So somebody says, every hole they dig has grubs, how to treat for them. I don't treat for them. About every fourth hole I dig in here, there's a grub in the hole. I leave it on the side and a bird comes along and eats it. That's my grub treatment. Doesn't bother me at all. I don't think that they're not causing me any overall problems back here. We don't have Japanese beetles here in this neighborhood because there's not a lot of lawn. There's big shade trees everywhere, so there's just really, you just don't have them like you have out in suburban areas with giant lawns that people are maintaining. That's typically the areas that you get more Japanese beetle problems. So there's different types of grubs, and they don't seem to be causing me any problems. Are they eating roots? Yes. Is it having a negative impact on my garden? No. And so I just don't, I feel like they deserve to be here just as much as anything else does. And again, when I do find one in a hole though, I just kind of move it over to the side. You might not see that as I'm planting a plant, real quick sped up on a video, but if there's a grub in that hole, there he goes. And a bird comes along and grabs it after I move away. The house faces east and the sun gets up over the house on these mornings, and then it lights up the back so much that it makes me darker and makes everything in the background lighter. So I've moved over to another location. This garden is pretty amazing right this minute. There's a few things here and there that need to be buttoned up and a little construction, actual construction work that needs to be done. But I think that, and again, I'm announcing an open house that we're going to have later in the video that you can come and take a look at it later in a month and a half or so. Let's see. Can I prune emerald arborvitaes in Georgia zone 8A? Yeah, you can do some shearing on them. We sheared emerald arborvitaes in the nursery when I grew them. Keep in mind, they don't want to be in Georgia in zone 8A, not even a little bit. So make sure you're keeping them watered. There's not an emerald arborvitae line where people put 14 of them in a row in Raleigh, where there's not at least one gap in it where one's died or a couple are struggling. This is not a plant that wants to be here in the South, despite millions of them being sold. There's not a garden center, box store, or a nursery that I could go to right now in this area that doesn't have a big giant group of emerald arborvitae they're selling, folks. But you're 800 miles from where that thing actually wants to be in much colder temperatures. So somebody has 4 green giants and a mixed screen. Then they planted 4 more, and they look different. They're just one is off colored. So green giants are done as cuttings and they're clones. Okay, so if they are green giants and they weren't mixed up with some other plant, they are in fact identical clones of one another. So any plant that's out here, this emerald snow loropetalum, it's not done from seed, it's done from cuttings. So somebody either found this as a sport, this white flowering loropetalum. They found it as a sport of another one where it was some sort of strange growth in another loropetalum, and they took the cutting off of it, or they crossed two and made this dwarf white flowering loropetalum. Since then, it's just been taken as cuttings or tissue culture. These are done as cuttings, but some things are also done as tissue culture in a lab. But it makes sure that we have clones of them. So every single one is exactly the same, okay? And so your green giants, hopefully the person sold you green giants. If you bought green giants, didn't matter if you bought them at this nursery and that nursery way over there, they're clones of one another. The differences though can be in how they were grown, how much fertilizer they were giving them, what type of soil mix they're using in the containers, at what point that plant came from some other place in the country and it had flushed out earlier than yours, or hadn't flushed out yet because it came from a colder area. So you're buying 4 of something, you're bringing it home and going, hold on, that doesn't look the same. Well, they may, this camellia here with all this new growth on it, almost certainly if I got a camellia that was coming from the Gulf Coast at this point, all of that new growth would have already hardened off. So I'd be bringing a camellia in here and going, why isn't it growing? It looks different. And the reason is it came from 400 miles, 500 miles south of my area, and it's already finished its growing for the spring season. So there's those kinds of differences. But as long as they're both green giants, they're actually clones of one another. And every single green giant has been taken off of an original one and been cloned over and over and over and over again. There is a little bit of, trying to think of the term for it, a little bit of genetic migration, we'll call it, because I can't remember the term right this second, genetic drift that will happen. Okay, so if let's say I take cuttings off this emerald snow loropetalum and I take it off, I take it off my plant for years, and somebody else over somewhere else is taking cuttings off of theirs for years, there will be a little bit of genetic drift that will happen, but not a lot. And I think what you're seeing again is, it's a lot of words, but what you're seeing is they came from two different places and they got two different timings, two different fertilizers, whatever the heck it is. But they should equalize in your garden over the next few years. Somebody asked, how can a professional get the public to be interested in a diverse landscape mixed with natives? Most want low-growing evergreens. Yeah, this is true. It's the meatball world. I mean, we're living in a meatball world. I put up the video about redesigning the front garden and immediately got somebody to tell me that I need a row of boxwoods across the front of the house. That's just the way people see. That's the lens that we see landscaping through. It's what we all grew up with. It's what we all have seen as what ornamental horticulture looks like. It involves having a shed full of chemicals, fertilizers, garden soils, and now raised beds have joined that, and meatballs I call them, low-growing evergreen shrubs that once a year they put on a show, and then the rest of the time they're just quiet and play nice and don't really need to be maintained. That's just what ornamental horticulture looks like to lots of people, including landscapers. I mean, there's a lot of landscapers out there. This is what it looks like to them, and that's what they're installing. Those are in fact dead zones. I mean, if we're being honest about it, if you're going past this neat and orderly, the more neat and orderly a garden is, with just neat, and this isn't a criticism of it, it's just the truth. Neat and orderly gardens where they flower seasonally in the spring, and then they're just green meatballs the rest of the year, are dead, and then have a monoculture lawn, are dead areas for pollinators, for migrating birds, and for anything else that lives in your area other than the human beings. The concrete driveway and the sidewalk, and then the green meatballs that only flower for maybe this little short window. Maybe they're not even native, so they don't, that flower may not even have any kind of appeal to, the native pollinators. It is in fact a dead zone. It's nothing, again, it's this person's private property, and it's what they like, and it's what they do. How do you move the needle on this? The needle's already moving. But in both conversations I had this week, one on campus with students and one over at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, this needle's been moving for a long time. When I started in this business 38 years ago, and the garden center I worked at was all about selling chemicals. When you walked in, there was a giant chemical wall, and we had this ortho book. It was this thick. Anybody who's been around in horticulture long enough knows this book. And this book just had every insect and every disease problem. It had a photo of it. And so people brought in leaves like soldiers. They came in with leaves. What's this thing and how do I kill it? And that was horticulture. You sold them meatballs, and then they came in with all their meatball problems, spotting leaves, and everybody wanted to completely control everything. Just control. I got to control it. The lawn has to be perfect. Every leaf has to be perfect. Everything that's crawling in the garden must die. And that was ornamental horticulture in 1980s and early 90s. And that has evolved. If you walk in garden centers now, you have to go look for the chemical wall. They still have them, but there's not like lines of people in there, for chemicals. And people are interested in pollinators, and they're interested in birds, and they're interested in the other things that your garden can be part of a solution to bird migration and, interesting habitats for all kinds of butterflies and native bees and all kinds of things. This has happened just because time has passed. And I think it will continue to happen because time has passed. When I started this channel, this is the direction I wanted to move people, but I'm not gonna have a channel where I'm whacking people over the head with a hammer going, you're wrong, because that doesn't move people. That just tunes people out. What I wanna do is just show, hey, look how much fun this is to have all these living things in a space like this. And so that's how I choose to move people, and I hope you would as well, the person who asked the question. You know, don't whack people over the head with this, otherwise you're never gonna move the needle, you know, on this. But there are more and more people who want gardens that are part of, they want these birds. You can hear all the birds in this microphone, I think, this morning. This is the sounds they want in their gardens and the things that they want in their gardens. They don't want dead zones, but there will still be plenty of landscapes like that, and that's their choice. And you know, we can't, you know, it's people's private properties and their private decisions, and it's not my business and it's not anybody else's business. But what I'm here to kind of teach is, hey, you know, let's take care of this soil, you know, so that next generations can, you know, participate in this, and let's make sure that we're keeping all these other species. All these other species are just as important as any other, you know, no species is above another one. That's why I kind of said that about those grubs. I just don't have a problem with them. They're not, you know, I don't have Japanese beetle grubs. Japanese beetle grubs might be another thing for me, right? But the grubs I have, they're not causing me any problems. So I'm not gonna go out of my way to go kill them. But that's me. So again, I answer these questions. I thought it was a good question. I've talked too much about it, but I don't think you can go around whacking people over the head with it. But the needle is moving, and it's moving in a positive direction, and it has been for a very, very long period of time, just slow and steady. Are there some new plants in breeding that are game changers, more just from slightly different color? Then they mentioned my Tokyo Tower Kyananthus, that fastigiate Chinese fringe tree that I showed last week, or talked about last week in the video. So the game-changing breeding, a lot of breeding is dumb luck. A lot of plant breeding is just being in the right place at the right time, finding something, you know, a sport on the side of a plant, you know, where the plant is white, but here's some pink flowers on it, and you take the cuttings and now you got a pink one. Some of it is you just happen to mix the right chance pollination that happens. Sometimes, you know, there's, you know, that Miss Scarlet Alyssium over there. I know the gentleman was just riding through his nursery, and that Alyssium was just clearly different than all the others. How did it happen? Don't know. But that Alyssium had all its flowers on the outside, where normally Alyssium has the flowers on the inside. So there's a lot of chance new introductions that have happened over the years. There's just, you know, I happened to walk past a green plant and it had a gold foliage on it. So there's a lot of that's happened, but now we're at the point where breeding, especially on college campuses, is taking a different kind of turn, and we're seeing just wild things coming in the future, and we're going to see, and we already are seeing sterile cultivars of what were very invasive plants, you know, that are truly sterile, plants that continue to flower from sterility. So by keeping the plant from being able to produce seed, the plant just keeps trying to flower just to try to overcome that. We've seen that in some spirea breeding. We're seeing in red bud breeding, where we can basically layering the colors within the leaf so that the leaves change colors over the course of the season. We're going to see that enter other plants. And so there's a very different type of plant breeding that's coming, but most of the plant breeding is happening. And I'm talking to students over on campus, and I just got people, you know, say, hey, who wants to go into plant breeding, you know, from the group? And there's several people who raised their hands, and I can't help but think back, you know, when we visited plant breeders, we visited Dr. Durr, and we visited, you know, we visited Danny Werner, you know, who did all these red buds you guys have seen on the channel, and we visited Buddy Lee. A lot of the accomplishments that they had were decades in the making. So, you know, Buddy spent a long time working on azaleas before he, you know, was able to do encore azaleas. So it's a long period of time, and a lot goes into it, and a lot of a life can pass by, you know, while you're trying to do these things. We had that we did that video with Kim Shearer up at the Morton Arboretum and thinking about tree breeding, you know, is multi-generational at the Morton Arboretum. You know, she's releasing trees from her predecessor who had that job before her. It's unbelievable the amount of time, but those times are being sped up. So that's the point of my answer here. Those times are being sped up. We're seeing different types of techniques used on these plants to manipulate them, and a lot of that is coming. Crazy things are going to come, I think. I think we're going to see plants change colors all season. I think we're going to see all kinds of interesting things going forward. I'm not trying to make hour-long videos, but somehow I keep doing it. I'm only on 19 here, so we're going to do a few more, and then maybe I'll move a couple of these others to next week. How do we slow down water on the land? That again is how you're treating your soil. I don't know how much water it would take to hitting this property right now for water to actually run off of it. It could run down the driveway and out to the street, so only down that stretch of the driveway. But I have done so much work to this soil. I can take a water hose and stand right here and hit, you know, there's a water hose right here. I could just water this spot for 10 minutes and you'd see the water just go away. So we have, again, you're going to see that as your soil improves over time, it's going to be far more receptive to the rainfall that's happening. And this is the way water, you know, here in the city, you know, New York City has massive flooding problems in the last decade. In the last 2 decades, more and more, we've seen, you know, as we've seen tropical storms and stuff hit the city, the massive amount of flooding they had, it's too covered in concrete. And it, you know, with sewer systems that were built 200 years ago, it's a struggle. And I unfortunately think a lot of cities are going to go through this. Houston has this, you know, massive problem as well. The more places we can have where, you know, water can get into the ground, the better. And on this property right here, it would take a lot of rain before anything started washing off of it. So time, keeping the ground covered and allowing all the processes, allowing this soil to just kind of fluff itself back up, become less compacted over time, and it will become a place where water can soak into the ground more easily. Can plants be helped by elevating when planting to survive wet winters? Yes. Yeah, depending on how wet the winter is, obviously. But yeah, that's something I've showed off on the channel since day one. Virtually everything in this garden is slightly mounded up, for sure. You want to, you know, planting things high is definitely the way to go. And then the next question was similar. Should you plant annuals and tender perennials high too? Yeah. Well, my annual borders just kind of naturally raise themselves over time because I'm constantly adding more compost to them, a little bit more compost each time. And so those beds just kind of raise on their own. And if you see any entrance into any shopping center where the landscapers are doing annual plantings on a pretty high level, they're raised, and then they're giving them some additional irrigation to compensate for the fact that there's, you know, raising something does reduce the amount of water, you know, it can get. Somebody asked how my Sarcococca is doing in the front garden. Here's a little piece of B-roll of that. They look absolutely fantastic. They're slightly under my Edgeworthia, but it's totally fine. They bloomed like crazy earlier this season. We need to get through here and show off some plants. I've shown off some things in peak flower over the last month and a half, but I really haven't shown much detail. And I'm going to do a video comparing the original walkthrough video to where it is now in the next few weeks as well. It should be a pretty fun video to see where it started and where it is today. And weirdly, one of the questions was, how did the property look before we began our process? Here's a photo of the front of the house. But again, I'm going to do a video where I just cut back and forth between those two videos. The original one that I did, which was shaky. I don't know why I was so shaky that day making that video, but I wish I had a more stabilized version of that video. But anyway, you can see where it started and where it is now. So there you go. I'm going to move a few of these questions over to next week, and you can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below. So big announcement, June 22nd, we're gonna have an open house here at the Raleigh Garden. We get a lot of people that ride down the road, and you know, it's you know, I can tell when they get down here, you know, that they didn't know that I live on a dead end road. And there's a little bit of like, uh-oh, what do I do now? kind of a thing. But again, a lot of people drive down here anyway to take a look at it. And so we're just gonna open up on June 22nd. So we'll have t-shirts for sale. I've got these 3 that I've already introduced, and they're over on the website horttube.com if you're interested in t-shirts. There's at least 3 more t-shirts I think will be available by then, including one for Holly, and a couple of women's t-shirts as well. So those will be available, and then the garden will be open for folks to come and take a look at it again on June 22nd. Well, I'll have more details as time goes on. I have no idea how many people will show up for something like this. If it's a lot, it's great. If it's not, doesn't matter. All of my neighbors know, this garden is a place where people walk to see quite a bit. So they won't mind at all that we're sharing it with others as well. So thank you guys so much for following along. And if you're interested in that June 22nd visit, I'll have more details about it over the next few question and answer videos. Thanks for watching.